Thank you for that lively introduction, as always. I think we've been introduced. We've got a limited period of time, so let's kick off. George.
No pressure.
Lots of experience. What is it? Google, Cloud, Lucent, did I read? BT.
BT, Alcatel-Lucent.
And others. And now CEO of the Saudi AI company. So too much capacity or not?
Simply speaking, not enough capacity. Now, if we could reach a point where we have enough capacity, but all you need to do is look at the trends when it comes to the need for capacity. And I'll use two trends from my background. I'll use telecommunications capacity, for instance. 20 years ago, if you got 64 kilobits to the house, that was good capacity. And with time, you needed more capacity in order to be able to fulfill what you need as you evolve. Two, if you look at Moore's law with respect to how do we evolve when it comes to compute capacity, every 2 years, that capacity is twice as efficient at 50% of the cost. And the reason I'm saying the second point is because you're going to see a lot of evolutions in these data centers. So the infrastructure that you're building, there will always be evolutions from a technology perspective. And that should not be confused with do we have extra capacity or not, because you're going to drive for a continuous upgrade and a continuous process. So I'll come back to the simple question. I don't think it's enough capacity.
Okay, you've got a bit of a vested interest there, but let me just turn to Rajit, who's got an even bigger vested, well, no, not bigger, similar-sized vested interest in it as well. Do you want to say a little bit about Data Vault and your investment in NEOM and the scale of it? I think a little bit of background, so people maybe not quite au fait with what you're doing, because you're doing it at huge scale. And maybe say a little bit about elsewhere where you're doing it too.
I will. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And the same question, too much capacity.
Okay. First of all, Data Vault, it's a Saudi company in digital infrastructure, which is right now very busy building data centers at scale, data centers which are sustainable, and the next generation of data centers based on innovation and efficiency. Let me lay out very quickly for my colleagues here on the panel and also for the audience a very simple hypothesis that many of us don't seem to be able to put together. You can, in the world as a country, build the world's best auto manufacturing company or manufacturing unit. But if you don't build the roads for it, those cars, those vehicles will never leave the factory. As simple as that. They will only get exported, but they will never be used. So the first thing that you have to do is to actually build the roads in the country in order to create the ability for these beautifully designed, latest state-of-the-art cars to ply on the road. As simple as that. And that's where is the whole thesis for Data Vault in the context of data centers. In the entire stack, AI stack out there, we are the bottom of the barrel, as simple as that, which is we build the core infrastructure of the data center. And if we don't build enough of that capacity, this entire AI revolution is going to be a missed opportunity for all of us. We can talk about 10 trillion, 15 trillion, 20 trillion, doesn't matter. But all of this is going to get delayed. Here we are, 8.2 billion people on planet Earth. In front of us, the single biggest opportunity in the last 100 years, which is AI, by far. And if we don't build all these data centers, it's just not gonna get rolled out in the way we think. Last week, we have just announced, in partnership with NEOM, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a 1.5 gigawatt data center, which is primarily going to cater for AI workload. In fact, 100% AI workload. This year, we are committing $5 billion of capital. The construction is going to start. And the whole idea is that so far, Saudi has been going and investing everywhere over the last 50 years, 60 years, because of all the oil wealth. It's now time for the whole world to come to Saudi. And we are the ones who are going to make that happen from a data perspective. We're going to house the biggest data centers out there and make sure, because of the vision of the kingdom in terms of building out all the connectivity through all the undersea connections, all of this data can be processed.
So you're saying that Saudi will be the third force?
Very much. If you say the West, US, and China are the two forces, then absolutely. Saudi is, I think, already a third force. We are seeing it last 2 days, last 3 days. Some of the biggest challenges of the world, the political challenges of the world are getting solved in the kingdom itself.
Okay, so we've had two votes for not enough capacity. I think we'll probably end up with 5, but let me just go to Sarah at the very well-known OpenAI. Maybe you could say a little bit also about the case studies, because one of the things that we see, and we're in just a $1 trillion industry, the advertising and marketing services industry, a lack of case studies. And we work very closely with NVIDIA. And I remember this time last year, NVIDIA was saying, you know, where's the beef? Where are the case studies? And this time this year, or the same time this year, they're saying exactly the same. There are very few companies that I think are full on. General Motors will be one. We won't go into the detail of that at this moment, but that's probably the biggest case study in the industry. But can you talk a little bit from OpenAI's point of view on capacity, the constraints that you see, if you do see them, and a little bit maybe go into some of the case studies that you've seen?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not going to break the line. We don't think there's enough compute. We make business decisions every day to not roll out models, to hold back features for customers, to not give our researchers the GPUs they are kind of demanding for us because we simply do not have them. And so my goal is to make sure that those were decisions that got made 2-3 years ago when we said this is how much compute we'll need, but it was very hard to persuade partners and so on to put shovels in the ground and build data centers and put chips in them for where we are today. And so as we sit here today, let's not make that same mistake in 2026, 2027, and 2028. In terms of case studies, first of all, I'll do a case study in the room. How many people use ChatGPT today? Okay, great. I think it's the whole room. If you didn't put your hand up, seriously, go try it out. It's a life changer, and it doesn't have to be for business. It could be, what are you going to eat tonight? What are you going to put on the table for your kids? What are you going to do for your next trip? So much goodness, and it's free. A big part of our mission is to make sure AI is there for the benefit of people everywhere. But in terms of usage, we talked this morning, actually, 400 million people are weekly actives on ChatGPT. That's 5% of the world's population. We're just getting started. 2 million enterprise customers today. And in terms of case studies, let me give you a couple. I'll be short. Moderna, using us for something called Dose ID. If we all were to get a flu vaccine today, we'd all get the same vaccine. And yet we're incredibly different human beings, different physiologies, different symptoms, different things we react to. Dose ID, personalized vaccination. Second case study, Morgan Stanley, massive financial institution, using us today from everything from fraud risk management all the way through to areas like equity research. For example, trialing, could you write a draft S1 for a company to go public in a matter of seconds, minutes, for something that would often take weeks, maybe months, with a lot of very expensive lawyers and bankers in a room. Third example, and I'll go to your neck of the woods, Sir Martin. So both Coca-Cola and Publicis have been using our technology to create much more personalized ad formats, to really think about when you want to go test creatives and so on, really fast-paced testing. You can do that with OpenAI. and to make sure that each of us is having an experience, whether it's with an advertising or maybe it's just pure content creation, that really starts to become one-to-one. And people often say, what's that really like? Well, I have a teenage son. He sits on the sofa a lot of nights. He's playing a game. That game is hyper-personalized to his experience in that moment with him and his friends. And so why couldn't a lot of the media and entertainment that we consume today feel like that? So we are seeing, there is not a CEO I meet with, I was in Davos a few weeks ago, that doesn't know they need to be doing this today, doesn't feel they're already behind. And the great news is from day one, the minute they give ChatGPT to their employees, they're immediately getting value back. So I think we're on the cusp of something massive, but we are just getting started.
We'll come back to that. So the MAG 7, or what we now call in Trump 2.0, the MAGA 7, the MAGA 7 are spending $500 billion this year. I think Amazon's the highest at $100 billion.
Yeah.
And Google's
Amazon,
up to
Google,
75
Meta.
billion.
Yep.
They got criticized a bit for putting another 15 billion in Q4 of last year. I think Meta's around 60, if I remember rightly, but it all totals up to about $500 billion a year. This is not enough, is what you're saying. And so, Christina, from an IBM point of view, because you're in the thick of competition in several verticals, as we were discussing in the green room, in the thick of competition with those MAG 7, MAGA 7 companies and others, how do you see it in terms of capacity?
So we're thinking about it in terms of the full stack of AI, right? So I think we have to think about each of the different components, everything from the chips and the infrastructure all the way through the size of the models and how then you apply the models, to Sarah's point. But everything that you think about in terms of that full stack, you can do from an intentional perspective and make progress and think about computing capacity, but also energy efficiency across all of those elements. So for example, if you start with the chips themselves, you think about AI-specific chips that are being invested in. We're doing a lot of this with our research department. We are seeing enormous energy efficiencies and capacity that's really, really taken huge leaps and bounds in terms of the impact that they're having over the last 15 years. We're talking about 99% more energy efficiency over the last 15 years here. We're also seeing that you can increase the capacity for compute within those chips as well. So there's one that we're working on called North Pole, and this is actually something that's inspired by the shape and physiology of our brain, and we're seeing that that is 25 times more energy efficient than any of the other chips that we have been working on previously as well. So you're seeing a lot of innovation here that can help support some of this compute capacity constraints that we're talking about. That's with the chips. Then we talk about the infrastructure as well. I mean, you're talking about mainframes and everything that's kind of going into the data centers. Every single iteration of data center infrastructure that you're talking about is more and more efficient as well. You're talking about increases that are increasing exponentially the computing capacity while also decreasing the costs and the energy usage. And so I think while there is this constraint that my fellow panelists are talking about that we still have to deal with, the technological innovation of how we think about this across the stack is going to be huge, and it will only continue to get better. And I think so, thinking about it a little more optimistically perhaps, that if the leaders in this room as well as in the rest of the world think about each of those different elements from an intentional perspective, how do I think about the chips that are going in? How do I think about the infrastructure that we're using? How do I think about the size of the model? We don't need trillion parameter models to do every given thing. You asked for a case study. We actually worked with a global bank that used our Granite model, which is much, much smaller, for a particular use case, and they were able to have outsized influence and impact in the outcomes, but they saved 95% on their costs because of the size of the model. So again, if you think about intentionality across each one of those areas across the stack, I think we can get there. It's just, we have to continue to figure out how to innovate and be intentional about our decisions.
Okay. So I left you to the end of in the first round, deliberately, Sam, because you look at it from an investment point of view more and a producer point of view. How do you see it, the capacity issue? Do you agree with they run businesses, you invest in businesses? So.
I mean, Just for the sake of our audience, I wish I could take the other side of this because it would be maybe a more interesting conversation. But no, I think we are woefully short on compute as well. And I mean, absolutely, we're seeing all sorts of technological developments that are increasing efficiency, and we absolutely need to solve power issues and other things. But I completely agree that I have every reason to believe that we will get there. But I think based on the fact that we haven't scratched the surface yet, and it's like, I mean, OpenAI, it's incredible that 5% of the world is using it now every week, but that's 5% of the world. And we haven't even talked up here about all of the applications out on the edge. And so we're going into this world where, like, increasingly, nearly all of the objects that we interact with in our lives are going to be imbued with machine intelligence and requiring probably not, I would say, almost certainly not, the chips that are powering AI today. I don't think we're going to be in a GPU future in terms of the dominant chips for AI, but we're going to have to create all kinds of technology that enables us to meet the demands of the usage demands, which are going to be, and again, OpenAI is the example, or anybody that's really integrated AI into their lives. Once you start, you absolutely can't stop. I mean, there's no, I wake up every day and really the first thing I'm thinking about is what's the thing I could spend a little time on right now in terms of thinking about how to better engineer my own life with AI to save myself so much time later. And we haven't scratched the surface on this, Mark. Mm-hmm. And how we're going to power, how we're going to feed this what will be an insatiable demand, whether we like it or not, is something we really still have to figure out.
I just want to come back to Sarah. It's a bit of a parochial thing as far as I'm concerned. But obviously OpenAI and, well, I mean, Microsoft made the first move, really, with OpenAI in terms of, before Google and before Alphabet, we worked very closely with most of the platforms, particularly with Google. And I just want to come back to search and the impact of the launch of ChatGPT, OpenAI, the impact on search. Because what I hear is that, and this to some extent comes from Alphabet itself, so it's defensive, that the primary demand for search, because of OpenAI and because of the LLM models that are now available in some profusion, are increasing the primary demand for search. And that's their defensive response. Do you think that is the case, or is that just people talking out of their own self-interest?
So I think that you need to split it up. There's, first of all, just what are people doing? And so we have seen an incredible uptick as we put search into ChatGPT. And often that's for a little bit more, I would call it almost a utilitarian search. I just want an answer. I don't need 3 pages. Like, who is Sir Martin Sorrell? Like, I just want one little short paragraph. I don't need
that would be a very short paragraph.
40 clicks. It's a good one. So a very kind of directed, almost utilitarian search. There's search, though, for things like commerce is a good example, travel, where often actually you do want to see something more broad-based. So the actual how people are searching is changing. Do I think there's more searches? Absolutely. Like, even just in my own life, I find it's just really quick to go to my phone and ChatGPT and remind myself, who is someone, what is this place, where am I right now? I find my personal use, like if I'm traveling, constantly asking, what is this building? Multimodal is fabulous there, because remember, search historically has been very, very text-based. The great thing about these models is they are multimodal. I can talk to it and ask a question. I can take a snap of a photograph and say, where is this? Or is this a good bottle of wine to pair with dinner? The commerce, the business model side, I think, is what is really changing dramatically. So Google built its business on the kind of 10 blue links that actually got smarter as people clicked on it, right? This is the algorithm that as more people click, you can figure out what is the best response. And then even underneath that, if you're going to put advertising against it, you can see very clearly. And search is the ultimate advertiser dream, because it's so, the person's ready to make a decision. I think that is what's tilting on its axis right now. And I don't think we've really figured out on the other side. Today we don't have advertising. And please no one write an article saying we're about to, because I already went through this once in the last 6 months. We think there's a different way to monetize today, but I think it is going to upend the economics of how we've thought about search, of what has been a kind of impenetrable fortress for the last couple of decades.
I don't want to make too much of it, but I think it's a really interesting question. Do you think that Alphabet was slow and Google was slow because they were worried about that issue, disintermediating the disintermediator, or was it about hallucination or Geoffrey Hinton's existential issue? I mean, he resigned basically from DeepMind.
I think George will definitely have a point of view on this too. But I do think that it is, within larger companies, the innovator dilemma is very real. And I think what OpenAI brings is we wake up every day only thinking about AI. That is all we do. So if you're our customer, we're only going to be thinking about AI. What's the next model going to do? What's the next feature that we can bring? And I think that focus when you're in innovation mode, it's what makes startups go from zero to changing the world. And it's always the thing when you're in the bigger company where you have become more disparate. How do you bring back that focus and speed?
Okay. George, you were amused by that. Let's go to DeepSeek and the Chinese. And what's remarkable about the last few weeks is what's happened to Chinese tech stocks, which have outperformed US tech stocks, I guess for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because of DeepSeek. And secondly, because President Xi has made a move towards the tech companies. We weren't quite sure who was in the conference because it was only the back of the head, so we were trying to guess what does Jack Ma's head look like from the back. But what should we be worried, coming back to the capacity issue, that $500 billion is being invested, the panel thinks we're not investing enough or we have blockages? Should we be worried? Is DeepSeek a signal of a different model, a cheaper model where less capacity is needed or not?
I mean, two things. First of all, it definitely was an important moment in time. As I said earlier, with technology, there is continuous evolution, but here there was a big jump in how they, out of necessity, and how they came up with the models. We knew these models needed to be optimized. We knew that we could not continue in a $1 trillion, in a trillion parameter model and investing the billions, so there has to be an optimization. There has been technologies that came out, like the transformer technology that came out in 2017 that was disruptive to how we build AI. There's agentification as a framework that's coming out now that's accelerating. But what DeepSeek did was something I think is phenomenal. It is phenomenal, and we should recognize.
So it is a Sputnik moment?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's Sputnik moment. Definitely a moment. Definitely a moment that was a wake-up, okay? And I'm decoupling that from the need of capacity. I think even with these moments, even with these optimizations, even though that some of these models could be ran on a lower type of chipsets, we still need the capacity. All I'm saying is that you're going to see more types of chipsets. You'll see people talking about inferencing, about training, about graphics, TPU, CPU. I mean, this is going to evolve. This hardware technology will evolve, like software will evolve. The optimization of the models will continue evolving, which is great. That is amazing. It needed to happen. And I think it was a wake-up call for folks that were just spending billions. Just mind you, I don't think it's an apple-for-apple comparison when we say this was done for 6 million and this was done for 50 billion. I don't think that's an apple-for-apple comparison, but I'm sure Sarah can explain that better than me.
Rajit, a Sputnik moment or not?
I think yes.
You're part of a $100 billion investment fund in infrastructure.
Look, I think, yes, it was a Sputnik moment in some ways, because I think from 2025 onwards, the single biggest challenge in the whole AI stack is the optimization of the cost of compute. There has been a lot of development in the last 3, 4, 5 years in particular. I mean, look at what's happening on the chip in the last 15 years. They have become super efficient. And yesterday, we saw the announcement from Microsoft, another level in terms of where we're going to graduate. So The important thing now is how do you, particularly for the fine-tuning and the inferencing, because that's the wave we are now moving into. The open AIs of the world, thankfully, did most of the work on the training, which will continue. It will not disappear. But the important transition that the world is now going to see is towards inferencing. Last year was 50-50, inferencing and training. This year is going to be 75-25, 75 for inferencing. And thereafter, it's probably going to plateau at 80, 85, or even 90. And what becomes fundamentally important thereafter is how do you optimize and create that lowest cost of compute. It's no different from what we saw in the world of energy, in the world of power. We had the lowest cost of energy, LCOE, which was a phenomenon of the world for a couple of decades. Now we need to graduate from LCOE to LCC, lowest cost of compute. And the winners are going to be the ones who will be able to deliver the lowest cost of compute.
Okay. Christina, what about the Chinese move? I mean, it's a quant hedge fund that came up.
I think it was a Sputnik moment from a communications perspective, right? But it actually just validated our approach from before, right? I talked about very use-specific, fit-for-purpose, smaller models. And that's kind of what they showed they could do at scale. And so that's the way that the industry is going to move, I believe. And I think like they just did a really good job of showing the world that that's something that was really powerful and has just as many applications, if not more, in terms of how we apply this going forward. So yes, Sputnik moment from a communications perspective, not necessarily from a technological perspective. Yes, I'm sure Sarah can go into much more detail there. But I think, if anything, thinking about the way that we apply our models, the size of the models, how we think about the application of that model for the intentional use of all of the enterprises represented in this room and your portfolio companies, I think will be the way that we have to think about this going forward.
And Sam, are you investing in DeepSeeks everywhere?
No, I am an investor in Elon's company, in XAI, and partly because I think he is an N of one in the world in terms of being able to build things with incredible capital efficiency.
How does he manage to do all these things at the same time?
I don't know.
No comment. As a serious point, do you worry about that as an investor?
Not at the moment.
No?
No, I think he's managing to do them all quite well. But I do think he
is there any limit to his capacity? Serious question.
I hope we don't have to find out.
Okay. But do you think there is?
But there's a limit to everybody's capacity, and there's a limit.
So he's mortal.
I believe so.
Okay, fine. Okay, carry on. So that's your DeepSeek equivalent.
No, I mean, look, I think that AI, however we want to look at it, whether we want to start at an examination of the foundational model level, or we want to think about the power, or we want to think about the chips, like it is going to be an incredibly capital-intensive in industry, and trillions of dollars will need to be spent to build AI in the vision that we all have and in the reality that we're heading towards. So first, yes, I think being an operator that can build with the most capital efficient person in the space or business in the space has a strong competitive advantage. But I think the DeepSeek moment to me was much more about, the importance of it was more about like a wake-up call relatively early still in this process that we need to be open source at the model level. I think that is the thing that like the light bulb went off for even the people that were going down a different path and thinking maybe this was going to be closed software. Like I think it was the reminder now before we're too far out over the ledge that at least at the foundational model level in software, we need to be building open source to accomplish what we all believe AI can do for the world. And so I think it was a wonderful moment where it just reset everybody that might have been thinking otherwise to remember, oh yeah, like this should be open source, let's focus on that. There's going to be no shortage of value to create from an open source model.
Okay. And just one thing, just going back to what we were talking about before, about the Saudi being the third force. Do you see any other forces emerging as an investor beyond US, China, Saudi?
Look, I think US and China will absolutely be there, and I think Saudi this is about having both capital and having the will. And
energy
Saudi
as well.
has demonstrated for years now that they want to be at the absolute cutting edge technologically and in terms of things that are going to make the world a better place. And they have the capital to do it. They have the mandate to do it from the top down, and they're doing it. So I see no reason why they can't be.
All right.
So
I think we're coming towards the end of our time. Now, in our discussion, which was fairly lively in the green room, and Sarah admonished me for sort of going to the pessimistic side of it. And so I have to say that we're all extremely excited, optimistic. Rajit said this is the biggest thing since the wheel or the equivalent thereof, or the fifth industrial revolution, whatever it is. So take that as read. But the question is, what is the thing that worries you most? And I would just inject this. I think we overestimate the power of technology, and we underestimate the power of people not to do the things that we want them to do. Particularly if you're, the biggest issue for companies is to try and align everybody to the purpose, the mission, the objectives, and the ingenuity of people to subvert and deflect you from the objectives, particularly if you're trying to lead an organization, is amazing. So with that as background, what are the things, Sarah, let's start with you. What are the things that worry you that when you go to bed at night, wake up in the morning, that you worry about?
We've touched on one. So if infrastructure is destiny, I worry that we're not building enough infrastructure and hence not controlling our destiny. I think number two, I worry about unequal distribution. In a world where having ChatGPT at your side right now is like having a PhD level student in physics, chemistry, math. It can code like the best coder in the world. I want that to be available to everyone. I have teenage kids. I think about kids in schools who now have access to literally one-on-one tutoring. But that is not for all kids. And so I think that unequalness of distribution could really start to cause even more kind of inequity globally, and hence cause a lot more kind of societal unrest. And so I think it behooves all of us here and on stage here to make sure that we really push for that more broad-based global distribution. Like 5% of the world, but 95% is not getting access right now.
Christine?
AI ethics. So I'm on our AI ethics board, and our philosophy is we are not regulating technology, but we're regulating the use cases of that technology. And so any of the use cases that come to us where there's questionable ethics involved in terms of how the technology will be used, we all have a very robust discussion on whether or not we support or recommend the use of that. And I think that's really important because, to your point, I say all the time, technology is never the solution. It is an enabler. And if we are going to enable this technology that is fantastically powerful to do amazingly impactful things in a positive capacity in this world, we have to make sure that we think about the ethical use of it as well.
Okay. George?
I would probably similar. I worry about curtailing AI that's extremely powerful for a lot of good things in healthcare and digital cities and climate change and all aspects of life, and curtailing it too early from a regulation perspective and putting a lot of guardrails because we're worried that it could be used for the wrong things. So to me, that's the worry. Is finding that right balance on how do you really enable the innovation and the capabilities of AI without curtailing it too early because we're worried about that it can go wrong.
Okay. Rajit?
I would say the democratization of AI infrastructure. I think that I believe that is the single biggest enabler of bridging the digital divide between the global north and the global south.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sam, you can have the last word.
I'm very much in the camp of AI ethics and bad actors being the thing I'm worried most about. I think these bottlenecks we've been talking about in terms of technology are probably a good thing at the moment. Maybe it's slowing us down a bit from moving too fast in a way that we're really not ready for the implications of this. And I don't think that that means superintelligence and all of the most horrible sci-fi examples of what AI might eventually do to humanity as a species. I'm talking about what AI is capable of doing now at scale in the wrong hands. And I think we need to really be way more focused on how to address that and how to be aware of when we're interacting with content that was created by AI and is misrepresenting what's actually happening
So
in the
you
world.
you think Geoffrey Hinton is right?
Well, yeah, and he's also talking about the most extreme, view and concern.
We're out of time, Sir Martin. We're out of time. Can we please give our panel a big round of applause?